All right, in this video, we are going to continue working on the database application. At this point, we have it up and running, but basically just the view is implemented and the skeleton of the controller so that it will run. There's really no functionality here whatsoever. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to work on the controller eventually, but before we do that, we have to at least kind of partially set up the model. So to do that, I just need to talk to you about how this table view component works. So every row of this table, right, is going to represent an employee in this particular application. And so what we'll need to do is to basically set up an employee class to hold that information, basically the information for each row like this, okay? So let's go ahead and get that set up. So I'm going to go here under application and then create a new Java class. All right, and I'm going to call that class employee. And I think that's all I want. Okay, and then I want some fields in there. 4 fields: private, string ID, 1 for the ID, 1 for the last name, 1 for the first name. One for the email. All right, and then I want a constructor. So source generate constructor using fields, and all of the fields I want in there. And then get and set methods, and that should be about it. So generate getters and setters for each of these fields here. All right, so this employee class would basically be part of the model, okay? All right, and let's save that. Everything looks okay. All right, so this, again, this employee class is basically going to store the information that sits on one row of this table here, right? So it has room for the ID, 1 for the last name, a field for the first name, and a field for the email. All right, so every row of our table is going to be represented by one of these employee objects, okay? All right, and so next up, what we need to do in order to kind of get things going with the controller is we are going to partially set up the model and with just like some sample data, just so that we can implement the model or the controller itself. And then what we'll do later on is go back and add it so that the model is interfacing with the database file that we created in the first video. Okay, so it's only a partial implementation of the model. We're going to go back and add more functionality to it later. All right, so what we'll need to do is, again, create a new class. And then new Java class. All right, and then database model. All right. Okay, and so what we're going to do in our database model is have an array list of employee objects. And I'm just going to call that employees. All right. So what's going to happen is eventually, right, the model is going to go do the query on the database file. It's going to pull, get all of the results of the query, right, and it's going to store all those employees in this array list. Okay. And in what we want to have happen then is for this table to represent or to list all of the employees in this array list. Okay. And we'll see that the table view, does that really nicely. The thing is, though, is we can't do it with just a regular array list. What we'll need to do it with is something called observable list. All right, and you can see it doesn't recognize observable list, right? So what we'll need to do is import observable list from javafx.collections. Okay. So what observable list is, and you can see if I mouse over it there, it's a list that allows listeners to track changes when they occur. So it's an array list with some extra functionality built in. All right, and what's going to happen is that this table, we're going to associate that with this table view, right? And so this table view is going to update every time this observable list updates. When this observable list updates with employees, right, it's going to basically sync with this view here. So the model and the view are going to sync with each other, and that's kind of like what we have talked about before with properties and bindings. Before in that section we were doing it with just variables. Now we're essentially kind of doing the same thing with lists of objects. Okay, so that's number one. We need to create this observable list in here. All right, next up we're going to need a constructor for this. So public database model. All right, and with the database, the constructor rather, what we want to do is just initialize this this list over here with some objects. Okay, and so what we're going to do, employees equals, we're going to use this JavaFX collections class. So it's Java. Oh, sorry, just FX collections. So we're going to use the FX collections class. You can see the documentation here. All right, and there's a number of methods in that class for dealing with these observable collections. And the one that we want here is observable array list. Right here. So the output, the return value, right, of this method is an observable list, all right, of a certain type of objects. All right, and so that's what we're going to use to create this observable list. So fx collections dot observable array list. All right, so that creates or initializes this observable list up here. And what I want to do is just add some data to that. So what I want to do is employees.add and then a new employee. All right, so I think it's one. The ID goes first, and then the email. So, and just add a few more in there. All right, let's save that. All right, everything looks okay. All right. I think we're good so far. So we've created this observable list, and then here we're just going to add some data to that temporarily. All this stuff is temporary. Later on, we're going to go back and add in the code that will query the database and then add the results of the query into this observable list. Okay. All right. So back in the controller, what we need to do is to add the model in there. So I'm going to go here and up at the top, create a database, a field for a database model. Okay, and just go ahead and initialize that. All right, and save that, check for any issues. That's fine. Close this out and just run it again and make sure everything looks okay, that it's working. All right, so far so good. Okay, so you can see that even though I have data in that observable array list, there's still nothing being populated in this table right here. All right, and the reason why is because, well, we essentially haven't linked up the table view and its and the model, right? So we haven't done that yet. So that's what we're going to keep working on here. All right. All right. So first here we can see under private table view. All right. For this question mark right here, we can now go ahead and fill that question mark in. That's going to be the employee class that we're going to be using, and this basically is telling that each row of the table view is going to have the data associated from an employee object, right? That's this this object that we created here earlier. All right, and then for the table column, for the ID column, that's going to be employee, and that has to match this first class right here, and it's going to be a string, right? Because we chose to make the IDs strings in this case. And in fact, these are all strings as well. The last name is a string. First name column is a string from an employee. Okay, and so far so good on this one. All right, and so we're got things set up. Let's just run this and test it one last time before we start adding the new code in there. All right, so far so good. All right, and so I think I'm going to end this one here, and in the next video what we will do is show you how to link up this table view, right, to the database model here. Okay. All right.